Hey, this is Michael Kelly Smith from Brittany Fox. You're watching the Crash Course Metal Show. Rock on.
What is going on, guys? We got with us here our very special guest, Tim Durling. What is going on, man? It's been a little while.
Has been a while, Crash. It's good to be back. I think the last time I was on, we were talking about either Tattoo Rodeo or Baton Rouge.
Okay, yeah. And I think the last time, it was around the time you did your Sammy Hagar book, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And we're right back in that time period again, which is a lot of fun.
Yes.
Early
It's always
90s.
fun. It's always fun talking because, like, we talk about Baton Rouge, we talk about Winger, we talk about Tattoo Rodeo, all kind of like the oddballs when Tim comes on. So, today's going to be a little bit different, though. Actually, we're going to talk about a bigger band in the '80s, one of the biggest, you could argue, and that is going to be Cinderella. And we're going to be talking about Tim. Why does these two albums here, Heartbreak Station and Still Climbing, why do they seem to get a lot of hate from fans and just hair metal fans in general?
Yeah, that's a weird one because, they didn't sell anywhere close, especially Still Climbing. They didn't sell anywhere close to what the first two sold. But, Cinderella, they have this brief catalog. It's short, but I think it's consistently good. The albums are a little bit different stylistically, but I just don't think they did a bad album.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with that. Like, now I am a little swayed because ever since I was born, like, Cinderella is and has been my favorite band. So, like, yes, I might be a little fanboyish in this episode and say, yeah, Cinderella never did a bad thing. But generally speaking, though, like, I I do hear now over the years, Tim, like we mentioned before, it feels like Still Climbing has been more appreciated over time since 1994 than, say, Heartbreak Station. Like, Heartbreak Station, you do have its fans, but at the same time, it's still one that, like, people just say they don't go and visit. They might listen to one or two tracks, but, like, as an album as a whole, they just don't get there with it.
Well, I'm old enough to have lived through that whole period, and I was a huge Cinderella fan. I got into them with the Long Cold Winter album. That's still my favorite. I love Night Songs, and but I bought this cassette when it first came out. I remember seeing the video to Shelter Me back when cassette singles were a thing. I bought the cassette single to Shelter Me. And I could tell right away, this is very, very different for them.
Mm-hmm.
The album, it wasn't produced by Andy Johns like the first two. And it's very, very stripped down. Like, just take the drums, for example. It doesn't have the reverb on the drums. It's very dry sounding. And, as I listen to it now, I don't think it's as shocking sounding as it was in 1990. Because in 1990, it was sort of a signal that, that Tom Keifer, I'm going to say Tom Keifer because he's the main songwriter, right? He's the driving force, wanted to do something different. This is not a glam metal album in the least. And, the look, they toned down the look.
Mm-hmm.
Poison, like Flesh and Blood, came out earlier this year, and they didn't really tone down the sound. They toned down the look. It was more of the cowboy thing, and not as much makeup and stuff like that. And Cinderella really toned down the sound. It was produced by a guy named John Jansen, who, that's not a name you see all that much, but I think that up until then I think he did the first two Faster Pussycat albums.
Okay.
He definitely did the second one, but he wasn't a producer that wasn't like an A-list producer, because at the time the A-list producers were Bruce Fairbairn and Bob Rock and Beau Hill and guys like that. And so what you get is this very bare bones sounding album that when I listen to this now, I hear Southern rock.
Mm-hmm.
I hear Leonard Skinner and Blackfoot, and with Tom Keifer's vocals. I mean, Tom Keifer's vocals make it Cinderella, but there's a lot of slide guitar.
Yep.
There's a lot of there's just a lot of that Southern feel to a lot of it. I mean, there's a lot
even a country, even a country
influence. You listen to something like One for Rock and Roll. That's practically a country song.
Yeah.
With a reggae beat. But no, there are some rockers on here. There's definitely some rockers. Love's Got Me Doing Time. Love Gone Bad.
Yeah.
But it was very different. Now, this album went platinum, so I mean, it still sold 1 million copies, but there was a change happening, and I was slow to see it. I was liking all this stuff, and I hate grunge. I was not there. I was not on board for any of the grunge scenes. So it was a tough time. Believe me, it was a tough time if you grew up during this period. But as far as Cinderella were concerned, I thought they were still a huge band. They were headlining at this stage. I mean, the Slaughter was opening for them on some of the dates, and you know, I thought they were doing all right. Then come to find out that this album did really underperformed in the eyes of the record label, because I think Night Songs and Long Cold Winter are both triple platinum.
Yeah.
Which,
multiple,
I mean,
yeah, certainly.
1 million copies is 1 million copies, but still. And they didn't have a huge hit off of this album, because Nobody's Fool, Night Songs had Nobody's Fool, and Long Cold Winter had Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. Those were both like number 13, number 14 songs. Those were big songs for them. Weren't top 10, but they were big. And they had other top 4, like they had The Last Mile and they had Coming Home. So they had 3 top 40 singles off Long Cold Winter. This one, Shelter Me, got to 36. And I remember being very surprised to find out that the song Heartbreak Station didn't even hit the top 40, because radio played it all the time. I just figured it was another hit for them. Peaked at 44. So something was going on. There was a slight shift with radio programming, and you know, and they didn't have anything to follow it up. I know they did a video for The More Things Change, but I don't think there was anything else that hit the charts. And they just kind of disappeared. I remember getting a Circus magazine in late 1991, and it had a little short article saying Cinderella missed the ball this year, and you know, talked about how they ended up in clubs, and they were also part of like, now I would have thought I would have gone to something like this, but David Lee Roth was going through the same thing. He put out A Little Ain't Enough, which I think is a fantastic album. It only went gold. So he ended up, you know, if you're really big, you don't need 2 or 3 opening acts.
Yeah.
But he ended up going on Cinderella, who opened for him in 86. So it was like deja vu. But they also, oddly enough, considering what Gary Sharon ended up doing, they also ended up with Extreme.
Yes.
Now, Cinderella, Extreme, David Lee Roth, that's a great triple bill, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But it was half houses. The tour was not successful. Now, Extreme ended up breaking big because of More Than Words, but that was kind of a fluke. Cinderella didn't have, you know, they just came down off of that, and then there was just such a long gap, and you just didn't hear anything from them. And Tom Keifer had his vocal issues and all of that. But, you know, Heartbreak Station, on it, we talked about this before we started filming, Crash, but it's my least favorite of the 4 Cinderella albums. But I still like it. It's just that mathematically, it's my least favorite. It probably goes Long Cold Winter, Night Songs, Still Climbing, and Heartbreak Station. But Heartbreak Station is still a fine album. And in a lot of ways, Heartbreak Station paved the way for Tom Keifer's 2 solo albums, which, let's face it, those are the closest things we're ever going to get to modern day Cinderella albums for whatever reason. But, you know, it's that stripped down bluesy rock, touch of country, touch of Southern rock. They do it very well, but I don't think people were ready for it. Hey, everybody. Crash gave me an opportunity to talk about my latest book. It is called Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. Like a lot of my previous books, this is a panel book. This talks about each of the 13 studio albums from Dawn Patrol through to ATBPO from 2021. It's available through Amazon everywhere. And if you like my previous books and you're a fan of Night Ranger, you'll definitely want to pick this one up. Thanks, Crash, for letting me plug this. You know, and image is such a weird thing. Image is such a hard thing to get rid of, because if you ask most people that didn't like these types of bands anyway, when they picture Cinderella in their head, they probably picture the cover of Night Songs.
Yeah.
Which they were as glammed out as you could possibly be. But most people looked at that. A lot of people look at that, I think, and they forget that's a heavy album.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that album rocks. It's just they looked the way they did. It had nothing to do with how good the music was. And I think a lot of people have a hard time shaking that, because if you think about 1990, that's the year the first Black Crowes album came out, and everybody loved that. That
Mhm.
sold 2-3 million copies, and it was sort of this other form of slightly harder guitar music that people were. I know a lot of people that liked this kind of stuff. They also liked that first Black Crowes album. If
Yes.
they didn't, maybe they didn't follow them all the way through, but they liked that first album. It's really not all that different.
Oh yeah, no, I
Yeah.
I agree with you as far as like because 1990 is a weird year. There's like sleaze metal, like the stripped down biker metal, started to really take hold as
Mhm.
well in the hair metal genre. It's just it's crazy to think about because like you said, I think when you're in 1990, the glam bands, the hair bands, they were still pretty big at this time. They're still selling,
Oh yeah,
and
Warrant,
yeah.
Firehouse. I
And
mean,
and when you're coming off a long cold winter to something like this,
yeah,
as a casual fan, yes, I could understand the shock value of it.
yeah.
But if you're like like a Cinderella fan that likes long cold winter and really dug what they did throughout that whole album, this isn't necessarily as a big a surprise as you would
I
think.
don't think so, and I think a lot of it has to do with the sonics,
Mhm.
because if you remix that album and put the big heavy reverb drums that are on the first two albums and maybe cranked up the distortion on the guitars, I don't think it would be that different, because Shelter Me starts off with an acoustic guitar, but Coming Home had acoustic guitar.
Yeah,
The
falling
Bad
apart at the
Seem,
seams.
yeah, so this wasn't new for them. Um, I think it was just the way, it was just the production of it, and it was kind of a shock. You got a saxophone solo on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
There's horns on this
it's way
album.
different. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
horns on this album, but at the same time, nobody nobody blinked an eye when Aerosmith put a horn section. Even
mhm.
Motley Crue on like Rattlesnake Shake from
Yeah,
Dr. Feelgood, it's
yep.
got a horn section on it. Anytime you work with Bruce Fairbairn or Bob Rock, for some reason, those guys were like, you know what we need? Horn section. uh, so yeah, but it was very, very different. And people just, I guess maybe it was ahead of its time. I don't know. Maybe they shouldn't have gone quite so stripped back with the production.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I don't think it would have mattered. I think that the tide was turning, whether people in the industry knew it or not, because it wasn't quite there yet. I mean, I think by 1990, Soundgarden had released a major label album, but it was like underground, like it was like,
Right.
bubbling under. Alice in Chains' first album had come out. And when they came out, I always just thought of them as a weird heavy metal band. I never,
Mhm.
the word grunge never entered my mind. And so it wasn't really until later in 91 when the whole thing just started to come down. But by early in the first half of 1991, like I said, Warner having hits, Firehouse are having
Yeah,
hits, Trickster's got a gold album,
yeah.
Slaughter's doing well. Unfortunately, Cinderella, who paved the way in a lot of ways, um, did this radical change, and I think it was. I'm sure Tom Keifer has no regrets about it, but at the time, it must have seemed like what where did the 2 million people that bought those first two albums, where did they go? What are they
Exactly.
buying instead? Who are they going to see instead? So I don't
Right.
know. They're
Yeah.
still on their major label, and that's I don't
And
know.
well, to your point about the platinum going platinum, it went platinum within like 2 months. The Heartbreak
Yeah,
Station,
Cinderella were
like
still a
yeah,
big band. There's
yeah,
no question
and
about it. And a new Cinderella album. I remember going into the store and there was a big display of it.
mhm.
It was no bit, nobody thought anything twice about it.
I to me, like we mentioned it. To me, it doesn't seem like a big shit, but I'm looking back in retrospect, because like obviously I didn't live through it. So like,
Right.
I mean, to me, it's not. Yes, it is a little. It is different, but I think it is still Cinderella. It's not like they went and totally forgot their roots or like just went and totally did something different. I think this falls right in line with Cinderella, and even to a lesser extent of what we see on Still Climbing as well. Um, but yeah, and to your point of the singles, there was only 3 singles off this album. The More Things Change, like you said, Shelter Me and Heartbreak Station. And The More Things Change didn't even chart.
I saw the video once.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's kind of crazy. I mean, not that like this song or this album is God's gift to hair metal
Yeah.
by any means, but there are plenty of bands hair metal bands that would say, "Hey, if our worst album is Heartbreak Station, we'll gladly take it." You
Yeah.
know, like
Well, the fact that the song Heartbreak Station, which is a great ballad, I think if that had come out a year before, even, that would have been a top 10 single.
I
It
agree.
was accessible enough. Like I said, I was amazed when, like, what do you mean this didn't hit the top 40? Radio played it all the time, but it peaked at 44. It's not like it didn't have a video.
Mhm.
And yeah, I remember thinking that was really strange, but then it all kind of made sense. It was like, okay, so that obviously means that there were a lot less radio stations playing them.
Mhm.
And they weren't the MTV darlings that they were just a few years previous. So I don't know. It's weird. Also, it did take a while. It took a little bit longer. I mean, 2 years, yeah, but it was actually more like 2.5 years. It was late 1990 when this came out. So, that might have had to, maybe if this had come out in the summer, I don't know. I remember getting this, seems to me, right around Christmas time in
Okay.
1990. But I liked it and I certainly listened to it a lot. But after a while, it just, nobody was talking about Cinderella anymore. It was a very strange thing. In retrospect, I can see now that things were starting to change.
Mhm.
But at the time, it was like, I don't get it.
Yeah. What are we missing
Because
here?
I still think, with newer bands coming out, I'm like, yeah, that's nice, but I still like Cinderella better. I still
Yes.
still think they're a better band.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, and to the point of that, the songwriting on here is incredible, in my
yeah,
opinion.
there's some great songs on here. As a
Just
matter of fact, as far as respect amongst their peers, they have John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin on string arrangements on some of the slower songs. Like that in and of itself should have been like, hey, if somebody from Led Zeppelin is on this album, then y'all need to shut
yes.
up because they're not on anybody else's album from this era. So what that tells me is that there was something different going on because most of the time, um, you had, I'm not going to pick on them because they took lots of abuse, but Kingdom Come had all of those, Kingdom
Yeah.
Clone, all of the just ripping off Led Zeppelin,
Yeah.
White Snake, which was not a new band. There was a lot of that, but there was a lot of bands that were trying to ape a little bit of that Led Zeppelin thing. Now, Cinderella, to my mind, never really did. I never really heard any Zeppelin in
Mhm.
Cinderella. So maybe that's why they were able to get John Paul Jones. And he says, yeah, these are good songs. I'll help you with the string
Yeah.
arrangements.
Yeah,
It's weird.
I think the 2 songs he
Um,
was on was Winds of Change and the title track. Yeah, yeah.
Heartbreak Station. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which makes sense. It's not like I hear strings on "Love's Got Me Doing Time," but but yeah, they were a big band. I mean, you can find. I think it's come out unofficially, but there's a live concert from
Mhm.
this tour, and it's a full length show. And they had background singers, and they had a
Yeah.
saxophone player. Like they were still a big band, but something happened along the way where their drawing power just it left them, which
Do
is
you
it's
have
too
a
bad.
favorite song on
And
this album, Tim?
I think that I think that the best written song on here is the most memorable is the title song. I think that's a classic ballad without sounding. I don't even know if I'd call it a power ballad. It's more of a
Okay.
quiet ballad, but it's got a great melody. And I remember I was fortunate enough to see them Cinderella in 2000 because in 2000 this shows you how things came back around, but it was one of the best bills I've ever seen. So it was Slaughter, Dokken, Cinderella,
Okay.
and Poison. And they were doing a pretty big civic center. Like they did a big tour that year, those four bands. And it was great. And it was great to see big crowds at these going to see this again. I remember looking around and thinking, you know what? This is great. All those people that were saying, those bands, you know what? Look at all these people
Yes.
having a good
Yep.
time. But they did this song live all acoustically, and Fred Coury whips out a violin and is playing the piano melody on the
Oh,
violin and the
okay.
solo. So it's like, didn't see that coming. And poor Fred Coury, I don't think he played on
I
any of these
think this
albums. There's no other drummers credited on here, but I heard that there was a modern drummer article where he was lamenting the fact that he didn't play on
I
any of
think
their albums.
he's only
I'm not sure about
credited
that.
on this album because, like, on the first two he isn't, and then by the time they're doing Still Climbing, he's in Arcade. So
Well, yeah, that's right. But yeah, Jody Cortez plays on Night Songs, and Cozy Powell plays on most of Long Cold Winter, and I think Denny Carmassi plays on a couple of songs, or maybe it's just
okay.
Second Wind. But yeah, it's a weird situation. But I mean, he's obviously a talented musician. But yeah, so probably the title song. But I also really like I like Love Gone
Mhm.
Bad. I like Electric Love. That's a good deep cut. Love's Got Me Doing Time is pretty nasty and sleazy. I like that one. Um, yeah,
Oh
it's good
yeah,
songs on here. No,
like
no
I just
question.
think like out of all of the albums, I think the songwriting is probably the best like on here as far as like lyrically, and mature. I would say.
Well, yeah, Tom's lyric. Yeah, I think Tom was he had plenty of his sleazy lyrics like "Shake Me" and stuff like that, but
Mhm.
not many. Most of the time, they were just songs about
Yeah,
life, and there's a lot of that on here. Very
yeah,
philosophical. Listen to something like "Winds of
or even
Change"
like Dead Man's Road
or
or Make Your Own Way. Like
now, Dead Man's Road is interesting, and I do like that song, but I think that Dead Man's Road, this is just my opinion, I think that was Tom trying to write his own version of Steve Earle's Copperhead
okay,
Road, which had come out a couple of years ago. And, he was at that time considered primarily a country artist, but I know lots of people that bought that album that were into the heavier rock stuff because they never heard anything that combined like the country twang with like a
okay,
tougher production. I think that was Tom's answer. It's not a ripoff. I think
okay.
that's
I'll
what he
have
was
to check
going
that out
for.
because I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, because to me when I hear Dead Man's Road, I think this is Tom trying to be like Robert Johnson or something, and it's awesome. Yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a storytelling song. It's really lyrically, it's not that different than something like
yeah,
Uncle Tom's
yeah.
Cabin. So I think a lot of these bands they were trying to
And that's
change.
why I think
You
that's
know, Poison was trying to
yes,
change. Warrant
yeah,
was changing. Even Slaughter between their
yes,
first and second album, but it's just the industry just said nope
yeah. We're done with
and
you.
just
And that's why
swept
I
them all
think
aside.
honestly,
We're
like
done with all of you.
1990 to 1993 is probably it's certainly my favorite era of the hair metal.
There were some great albums that came out.
Yeah.
Winger's Pull and the Bat.
Oh
Yeah, there
man.
was some really, really mature, still rocking stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This album, Heartbreak Station, just needs to be defended. If nothing
Yeah,
else, it just needs to be
listen. I'll
defended.
defend anything this band because I really like this band. Seeing them in concert when I did, Tom sounded great. You know, that was a tough act to follow for Poison. I love Poison, but
Yeah.
Cinderella were the better band.
Okay.
They
All
were
right.
no question about it. I wouldn't have wanted to follow them. They were professional. They were rock star. They came. I could still remember the fog, and they came out. They started with Night Songs, and Tom
Hmm.
comes out with the double neck Gibson double neck. They wheeled the grand piano on stage for "Don't Know What You Got." Like it was a full on, great performance, and
Okay.
they would have been a tough act to follow.
Oh yeah. And
As a matter of fact, one thing that I remember seeing, I always liked it. I always used to like this when I would see bands that I liked hanging out together.
yeah.
There's a picture inside of Heartbreak Station with a couple of bass players. I'm sure that you've talked about a lot on here. Right about here in the middle there. It doesn't
Oh,
show up,
Bobby.
but that's yeah, it's Bobby Dahl and Eric Brittingham.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, not the last time, but when I saw Brett solo in 2019, Eric was his bass player.
That's right. Yeah.
So they obviously, and those bands, their careers are parallel, right? At the start, they had 86,
Hmm.
88, 90.
From the same state.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, very different in their approach.
Right. Yeah.
Um, like Cinderella were never really all that glam
No.
sounding.
Just
They were
just
glam
just the album
looking.
covers. Yeah. Yeah.
Poison were glam and they loved it. They wanted to be. And they were really good at it. And it was fun rock and roll. Cinderella was fun rock and roll too, but there was just more. Uh, I think Tom Keifer would have been a successful musician in any era that he would have come up in.
Yeah.
He could have made it as a singer songwriter. He could have written songs for other people. I mean, he eventually did. Like he co-wrote a couple songs for Lynyrd Skynyrd on their 1993 album, The Last Rebel. And I think if he'd
Oh,
had
okay.
his druthers, that's probably the type of band he would have liked to have been in.
Right. Okay, that's right. I forgot about that he
Yeah.
did that. But yeah, I mean, he's just talented at
Yeah.
the end of the day. He's one of the most talented songwriters of the hair metal genre. So
Yeah.
that's all there is really to that. So, Tim, now we kind of got the biggest elephant in the room. We kind of talked about that, but like I said earlier, Still Climbing is one that does kind of get respected now more so than it did back in the day. Do you remember picking this up when it was
Oh,
out?
yeah. Yeah. I certainly do.
If you guys enjoy this content that we're doing here, please like the video, please share it, and then please subscribe. That helps the channel out so much, just helps everything that we're doing here. And also leave me a comment as well. Always interested to see what you guys had to say. Now let's jump right back into this video.
It couldn't have come out at a worse time.
Yes, yeah.
Like it was, it's really hard to describe to someone like yourself that didn't grow up in it. It was almost hostile for a band like that to just dare stick their head up. And it did nothing. Like it was an absolute complete failure. I don't even remember seeing it in the delete bins.
Okay.
Because I just don't think they pressed enough copy. I bought it in the store when it first came out. And what I've never quite understood, another band that came out at the same time as Poison and Cinderella is Tesla. And I'm a big Tesla fan. They put out the album Busted Nut in late summer of 94.
Right. Yep.
Right around the same time this came out.
And it went gold.
And I don't know how they pulled that off. I really have no idea how they pulled that off, because it was an even, like I said, the climate was not hospitable to bands like that. Even though Tesla were never a hair metal band, they got lumped into it. And they still managed a gold record, like all of those Geffen albums certified. That's crazy to me. And this is a better album than Busted Nut by a considerable amount. This is a fantastic album. It sounds great. It's well produced. The songs are really good, but there was sort of an air of, even though I'm listening to this and enjoying it, I know there's no way this is going to be a hit. There's simply no way. Now, rewinding a little bit, it boggles my mind that Cinderella managed to get a song on the Wayne's World soundtrack.
Yes.
With Hot and Bothered. Now, it's okay. It's not a groundbreaking song, and it sounds like Tom didn't spend an awful lot of time on it. And it sounds like it came from the Heartbreak Station sessions. I don't know if it did. I actually don't think it does, because it says it was co-produced by Gary Lyons and not John Jansen.
Okay.
But how they managed to land that on such a big soundtrack after sort of the tide had already turned, good on them, or good on Larry Mazer, their manager, for placing that on there, because I'm sure that did a lot for Tom as the songwriter.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't a hit.
Well, and to your point of the Wayne's World soundtrack, like, you had Kix on that soundtrack. You had Rhino Bucket on that soundtrack as well. Like, there was a lot of deeper bands on that
Bullet
soundtrack.
Boys doing Rock Candy.
Yeah. Yep.
So it was like the last gasp, you know. But then, you know, maybe if this album had come out right around that time, because let's not forget that right around that time, you still had bands like Ugly Kid Joe coming out, who were not grunge. They weren't hair metal. They had a comedic side to them, but it was still guitar rock, and it was still upbeat.
Right.
So
you had bands like Jackal as well come
exactly
out.
Yeah. So it's not impossible to think that they might have been able to do what Tesla did and at least have a gold record. But 2 more years and 2 more years of the absolute saturation of Smashing Pumpkins and Soundgarden. Soundgarden were absolutely huge when this came out, because Super Unknown was a big album. Stone Temple Pilots were out. You know, it was just, even, you know, Collective Soul, like, it was just different. This stood out like a sore thumb. And I just don't think it ever stood a chance. And I know Polygram did not spend very much at all promoting this album. I think I saw one ad for it in Metal Edge, and that was it.
Okay.
I don't think there's any videos from this unless you count Hot and Bothered, but I don't think there's any videos from this album. Now, I will say that one thing that would have been difficult from a record company perspective, I like this album a lot. To me, there are no obvious singles.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Last Mile, there's no Gypsy Road, there's no Shake Me, or like there's no obvious. Even the ballads on here are more
Through
of
the
that
Rain.
southern rock. Through the Rain, hard to find the words. I don't know what you would have done for a single from this. I mean, the first thing they put up was Bad Attitude Shuffle. That's never going to get mainstream
No.
airplay. I also remember that there were because I was in radio at this point. And I remember they put out All Comes Down on a polygram sample. It was the last song, so it wasn't being pushed.
Okay.
And I can remember people laughing at it at the station. Look at this Cinderella,
Really? Okay.
you know. Oh yeah, it was bad, man. It was really, really bad. And you were
Yeah.
judged. You still listen to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
crap?
Now, because I will say I have heard stories of this, like I don't know if it was like record companies or like promotion people or whatever. They went up to kids and said, "Hey, listen to this album," and they listened to it. The kids liked it, but then when they said it was Cinderella, they were like, "Oh, fuck that," like.
I'm telling you, there was such bias. And the story that reminds me of is I saw an interview. I don't know if it was on one of those VH1 specials, but it was a guy named Derek Shulman. Derek Shulman was a member of the progressive band Gentle Giant, but that's got nothing to do with this. He ended up being an A&R guy at Mercury Records. So he signed Bon Jovi, and John Bon Jovi got in his ear about this band Cinderella that he saw in a club in Philadelphia and said, "Hey, these guys are good." So he signed them too. And he was still a supporter of Tom after the band had they never really
Right.
broke up. They kind of just went on hiatus, but Tom had written up a bunch of demos, and it's the same thing. Derek Shulman went into this, whether it was Mercury or wherever it was he was at, might have been Atlantic at this point, and played them a bunch of these songs. And they said, "That's great. Let's sign them." Told them who he was.
Yeah.
No. So there was such a bias, and it's aggravating.
It is.
There is such a stigma, and to some people that stigma persists to this day, which is why I'm going to give a shout out to my buddy Sean Kelly, who plays guitar for Lee Aaron, Coney Hatch. He was in Helix. Great guy. He's been in a couple of my books. Sean wrote a great book called "Don't Call It Hair Metal."
Okay.
Anybody who likes this stuff and was sick of defending it, I recommend you get that book, because that sums up a lot of the way I felt about this stuff. It's like, no, this music is as valid as any other type of music. To me, you go back, I see those early 90s videos of Cinderella and Poison, like I said, when they were less glam, stripped down. And those look less dated to me than a bunch of guys in flannel.
I agree.
I always thought they look, well, I could go, it was like, you look like a bunch of bums.
Yeah.
Like, you dress up.
Yeah,
before you leave the
no
house.
stage presence.
Put on a clean shirt at least.
I'm with you. I never got that either.
Yeah. Oh, I hated that. Oh, I hated that stuff.
Take all the fun out of life.
So much. Yeah, exactly. And you know what? The rock scene has never been the same, because there have never been, honest to goodness, you'll see there have been like anomalies once in a while, like Buck Cherry got lucky with the one album and the one song. But there's just never been a rock band that's had a string of actual rock songs that were hits. This was the end of that period.
That's a very good point.
But Still Climbing, all anyone needs to do is hear this album, because I think a lot of people that even liked the first two albums didn't hear this. It was just, either they couldn't find it, didn't know it was out. If I wasn't reading Metal Edge, I don't think I would have known this existed.
Yeah, no promotion at all. Like
no. So no videos. Like I said, if there's no videos, you might as well forget it. And so, yeah, Fred Coury's gone at this point. I mean, he came back when they started touring again, but drums, great drum sound, Kenny Aronoff. I mean, he's a pro. So, I mean, and it's a really good sounding album. Now, who produced this one? I just forgot that.
The producers are Dwayne Barron and John Purdell.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and those are two guys who I think they worked with Ozzy Osbourne. I think they worked with Alice
Okay.
Cooper. I think they worked with Kix. Could be wrong about that. They did. So yeah, there were some name recognition. It's a
Yeah.
good sounding
And
album.
that's the other thing too. I will say that might be kind of a little different. Like the more I dig into this album, you do have a couple that are like leftover songs because you do have a song called Free Will in here, which was from before Cinderella got signed. You know,
Oh yeah, oh yeah. If you listen to that song and then you listen to Hell
yeah.
on Wheels, they sound like they came
Yep.
out of the same sort of
Yeah, because
jam
they
situation. I love Talk
yeah.
Is Cheap. That's
Yep,
one of my
exactly, and
favorites on
that's
this
another one
album.
from,
Love that song.
'85, and then even the song,
Yeah,
The Road's Still Long sounds like it would have been an
yeah.
aftertake on Heartbreak Station, you know?
Yep. Yeah. A lot of these songs follow on. Certainly the slow ones do, but Blood from a Stone I
Mhm.
really like. Road Still
The
Long.
Blood
Yeah.
Blood
This
from a
is good.
Stone,
It's
I
a
would say
great
would
album.
probably be the closest thing you could get to a single on this album.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think so. It yeah, like I said, that would have been the problem right there. There really was no, not that a band like this would have had a hit anyway, but there just didn't seem to be any songs. There's no one song that sticks out where I would say, well, let's push
Yeah.
that to radio.
Especially if you don't
Um,
want a ballad. Like
Yeah, and the ballads, to me, the ballads are good. They're good, solid songs, but they're not hooky enough
okay.
to, they just sound like one of them, again, we use the Leonard Skinner thing. One of them has a slide guitar, kind of puts me in mind of
Yeah, yep.
Freebird. But it's good. It's a really good, solid album. And by the time you get to Hot and Bothered, that's almost like an afterthought. You're like, well, I'm glad they put it on here, but it's not the highlight of this album by
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm kind of in a different camp. Like, I do love Hot and Bothered. I think that's a great song. But yeah, like, there's plenty more to this album than just that. If someone just buys it just because they heard Hot and Bothered, and if you listen to Hot and Bothered, it does sound totally different than the rest of the album.
Yeah, it totally, you can tell it was recorded earlier. It was recorded by a
Hmm.
different producer. It's just a totally different approach. Now, I don't know when they wrote it, but this came out in
Okay.
1997. This best of called
Yep.
Once Upon a dot dot dot. And there's the one new song on here was called War
Yeah.
Stories. Wouldn't surprise me if that came from these sessions.
Hmm.
It's okay. Tom sings it
Right.
lower because his voice, like, and he'd done so much damage to his voice at that point. So,
Well, and that's the
um,
point too. I wanted to bring up with even Heartbreak Station. Do you think he kind of made that switch to protect the voice a little bit? Because you don't hear a lot of vintage Tom Keifer even on Heartbreak Station.
I don't think you hear as much. I think it's in some of the individual
Hmm.
songs, but he's not singing in that voice throughout the
Right.
songs. Like the verses will be in his sort of lower range, and then he'll bring it up a little bit, picking his
Hmm.
moments, kind of thing. It's it's the same thing as, really. It's a lot like Brian Johnson from AC/DC. It's not a
Yeah.
natural way to sing, so sooner or later you're going to shred your voice. You're going to
Yeah.
ruin your
Yeah.
voice.
And sadly, that
Um,
only happened after 6 years for Tom, or six plus, years.
Yeah, yeah. But I will say this: when I saw him in 2000, he sounded fantastic. He
Hmm.
sounded vintage. So when I saw them in 2000, they were selling this CD in the merch booth. There's no label on this, but it's just called Live.
Okay.
And I'm not sure when this was recorded, but this looks very similar to the set list that they did when I saw them. They didn't do any songs from Still Climbing when I saw them, not even Hot and Bothered. That was
Really?
all stuff from the first three albums. But to their credit, they still did a lot of songs from Heartbreak Station. More Things Change, Sick for the Cure, Make Your Own Way, Heartbreak Station. And they didn't do Shelter Me. Love's Got Me Doing Time, Love Gone Bad. So, they
Wow.
were,
Really? They did
but I
that
mean, they
many?
only had three albums. So they were only choosing from three albums. So you're going to get
Yeah.
a third of
Okay.
it anyway.
Because the two times I'm trying to remember, the two times I seen him live, it was 2005 and 2006. They didn't do hardly anything off of Heartbreak.
And
So
to me, that makes sense too, because I think that wouldn't surprise me if that album went out of print too.
yeah,
So why would you promote something that people
can't get
couldn't go out
anymore.
and get?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That very good point. And just to the fact of most of the fans that are there to see you don't really care for that album to begin with. Then
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a
And especially if you're part of a bill, if it's not just your show, you're
right.
playing for casual fans. You want them to walk away saying, I liked every song they did.
Yeah. Yep. And you only got what, 45 minutes if you're lucky?
Yeah,
If you're not the
45, 50
headliner?
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're not the headline, if you're really lucky, you might get like a minute and an hour and 10. But
Yeah, yep.
yeah, so yeah, you
Ah.
gotta you have to adapt.
Now, since you did bring up the Tom Keifer solo albums, I feel like Tom Keifer's Rise is like a part 2 to Still Climbing. Do you
I'd
have
agree
any
with
of that
that, and
thought?
I would say that the way life goes is a part 2 of Heartbreak Station.
Okay. All
Now
right.
it's a shame. It's a real shame that we'll probably never get to hear that mysterious fifth album that was supposed to come out on Sony in 1999. Because for those that don't know, John Kolodner, the big A&R guy that signed a lot of these bands and did very well, he relaunched Portrait, which was a Sony label
Hmm.
in the late 90s, and they put out the Rat self-titled Rat album. They put out Great Whites, Can't Get There From Here.
Yep.
They put out CC DeVille's band Samantha 7.
Okay.
But there's two, but none of the albums did anything. They were trying to bring it back, but it
Mhm.
didn't really work. But there are two albums that went unreleased. One of them is the sort of mythical Third Damn Yankees album, and then the other one was a Cinderella album that I think Sony still owns the rights to the recordings,
Okay.
but I know a lot of those songs ended up on Tom's first solo album, like Solid Ground and a bunch of that
Okay.
stuff. So,
That
but yeah,
makes
I really like both the Tom solo albums, and you're right. I think each one of those is a sequel to a corresponding Cinderella album.
yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, I certainly I did now that you're talking about, with solid ground and stuff, the way life goes, it does kind of give me more of a heartbreak feel, but I mean, it hit me in the face though with Rise. It
Yeah,
hit me in the face that
Rise
it
is a
was
harder album.
yeah, it hit
That
me in the
comes on
face as
with the
far as
death
like a
of
still
me. Like
climbing.
he's singing like he means business.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Tim, is there anything that you would just tell the Cinderella fan or the hair metal fan, what have you, to give these albums another chance and an open mind? Like, is there anything else that you want to tell them?
Well, I would say Heartbreak Station, go back and forget what you first thought of it when you put it in 1990 and just listen to it as an album now. And then you listen to it along bands that are out now, like Rival Sons.
Yeah.
And it's not all that different. It was sort of pointing the way. And it doesn't sound, to me, it doesn't sound like it came out in 1990.
Hmm.
It sounds kind of timeless. And then Still Climbing, just people just need to hear that album if they can find a copy of it. I don't think it's ever been reissued. There would be one right there where I'd love to see Rock Candy uh, put that album out.
Yeah.
But Still Climbing is just a good, solid Cinderella album that came out at the absolute wrong time. And I think because they took so long, I think what took long was waiting on Tom's vocal cords to heal,
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately. And it was cheaper for Mercury to put the album out and bury it than it was for them to not put it out because they'd signed a contract, and that was obviously the end of the contract. Maybe the best of was the end of the contract. I don't know. Although they did put out, there's been a lot of other Cinderella compilations,
Oh, yeah.
so it's not like they didn't see that there was potential to make some money. There's one compilation that I still have to get, and I don't know if you and I talked about this or not. It came out in 2018, and it's called the Mercury Years. It was put out by the company just went out of my head, but it's got all of the albums, but it's also got some live stuff, and it's got there's a few stray songs that never made into the albums. Like there's one called Galaxy Blues,
Okay.
and there's a really good, and I knew this because it was the B-side of Gypsy Road, but there's a good live version of Jumpin' Jack Flash by the Rolling Stones. This collects all of that together. You can get it on Discogs fairly cheap. So I would say
Oh,
if anybody
really?
doesn't have
Okay.
any Cinderella, you got all of it right there in one
Yeah.
package.
Yeah, that's a good point. I heard of that coming out, but I never came across it.
I got to get it one of these times before it goes completely scarce or the price goes through the roof.
Yeah.
I should do that before the late tax.
Yes, yeah, sooner than later, I would say.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a couple things that happened recently like that, and I can kick myself for not
Yeah.
picking it up when I
That's
did.
like we mentioned the Rock Candy. They do such a great job with the reissues, but you got to get them when they're first out. Like I
When they're
just got the
fresh, yeah.
first two, the first Yesterday and Today albums. I had them. I had to get the Rock Candy reissues because it's Y&T. But
Yeah, yep.
those don't always. Some of those stay in print. Some of them don't.
Yeah, that's the thing. You never know.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, I just love the variety on these two albums. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
With this. Like, and even to the point of Long Cold Winter. But it seems like everyone's okay with the variety that is on Long Cold Winter. But when it comes to these two albums, okay,
Yeah. Long Cold Winter was a little bit different than Night Songs. They kind of took the foot off the accelerator a little bit,
yeah,
but it
so,
wasn't that drastic.
no, yeah, still
Heartbreak
had the same
Station was
production
more
feel.
drastic. Like if you went from Night Song straight to Heartbreak Station, it hardly sounds like the same band.
Yes, yeah,
It's really not all that different if you listen to those with that in mind. And the fact that Heartbreak Station was probably the kind of the sound that Tom always wanted on an album.
hmm Now, final question here. If Still Climbing came out in 1990 instead of Heartbreak Station, would that have went multiple times platinum?
Well, here's what I would have done with that. I would have made sure that Heartbreak Station, the song, was on it.
Okay.
And I probably would have put Shelter Me on there too, because those are catchy songs. And obviously radio did play them. Other than that, yes.
Yeah.
And Hot and Bothered might have even dented the chart.
I think so. In 1990, I think so.
Because I mean, if Coming Home and The Last Mile cracked the top 40, Hot and Bothered is definitely accessible enough to do that.
Yes.
So yes, the answer is yes. But I would have made sure, I putting my A&R hat on, be like, guys, this is great. To John Kolodner, if anybody's seen interviews with him, he's got this really nasal voice. He'd be like, I don't hear a single. Well, I said, guys, I hate to tell you this, but I don't hear a single. You got to give me a single. So.
You got to give me a cherry pie, right?
Right. You got to give me something like Love in an Elevator. I need something like that. Yeah. Oh, that's poor Janie. But anyway.
I know. And
cherry pie guy.
That's another top
Talk
5.
about a talented songwriter. That's almost an episode in itself. Talented songwriters within this genre.
You are prefacing one of my videos that's coming out.
I'm not surprised. Great minds think alike or something.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, like that's the thing, and that's the thing people need to go back and appreciate about Cinderella. Tom Keifer, this was not a band. He didn't co-write with a bunch of people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there's no Desmond Child, there's no Jim Vallance, there's no Mutt Lange, there's no Diane Warren. Tom Keifer wrote the majority of these songs himself, and if he did co-write, he co-wrote with Eric Brittingham, I think, a couple of songs, but most of the time he just wrote these songs.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff. Yeah, a lot of the stuff, like demo stuff, pre '86, like he wrote a lot with like Michael Kelly Smith from Britney Fox when they were together.
Yeah.
And once they got signed to Mercury, it was kind of the Tom Keifer show.
Yeah, kind of. Let's not forget Pat's Chili Dogs.
Yes, yeah, that's one of the best commercials in heavy metal.
I remember when I first saw that, it made me smile. I had no idea that existed. Like this is great.
Awesome stuff. But Tim, my man, thank you so much for coming on. Can you please tell everyone where they can find you?
Well, I'm at Tim's Vinyl Confessions. If you go to timsvinylconfessions.com, it'll bring up my YouTube channel. I'm on all the socials, and just 3 new episodes every weekend. I do an album and review every Friday. So yeah, just lots of content, and appreciate it. Appreciate the chance to come on and chat about a great band that even though they sold a lot of records, I think people need to go back and say, they really were good.
Yeah, slightly. You don't want to throw around the word underrated, but you could make an argument that Cinderella was a little bit underrated compared to their bigger peers.
Right. They're not normally one of the first bands that come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start to dig into those albums, you're like, this is just really, really good rock and roll.
100%. I think that's a perfect place to leave it there, Tim. So, my man, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, let us know in the comments what you guys think of the final stage of Cinderella with Still Climbing and Heartbreak Station. What do they mean to you? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Or are you kind of in the middle? So, but until next time, guys, that's Tim from Tim's Vinyl Confession. I'm Crash, and stay out of that collateral damage, guys, and we will see you later.
That it's called I Want to Rock Your Body, and then in parentheses it says to the break of dawn.